are going to hear from two recyclers who are going to demystify that process, answer some questions that you have, and also talk about how recycling can really impact the decision and design making processes that we're all making today. So our first speaker will be a familiar voice to our longtime PSC members. We had, what, 40% that have been to several events, so she might be familiar to that audience. That is Kate Bailey from EcoCycle. So Kate has presented at Impact Unleashed before, the first panel that Caitlin has mentioned that we'll be revisiting on later today. And she was integral in helping us develop our packaging report that is available on our website, where we look at many, many, many different kinds of pet food packaging and what is the good, the bad, and the ugly of all of those different kinds of packaging. So if you've never checked out that report, I'm going to highly suggest you go on the packaging part of our toolkit, which you can access through our booth in the exhibit hall, and check that report out. She's going to be talking about what has changed in recycling in the last 2 years, and do we need to update that report? There's been a lot of news about recycling in the market. Has it really, collapsed since China and all of those things? Then we'll be hearing from Kurt from Engineered Plastics, who's going to be telling Kurt is our recycler through the Flex Forward pilot, and he's going to give you some lessons that we learned as we started those recycling trials just a few weeks ago. So real up-to-date news, and he's going to be talking about the lessons that we learned and how we all can be making small changes in our bags to dramatically up the recyclability of those two things. And then we're going to have plenty of time for you guys to kind of pick the brains of our recyclers and answer any questions that you have. So really excited to hear from Kate and Kurt today.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about evolutions in recycling and sustainable packaging solutions. My name is Kate Bailey. I work for EcoCycle, Colorado, and I just wanted to pause right off the bat and say thank you for being here. I know there is no shortage of other things going on in the world right now, so really appreciate that we're all coming together to talk about the importance of recycling, the importance of sustainable packaging, and making the time to really look at solutions and how we can work together. And so hats off to PSC for really putting together a banner lineup of speakers. Excited to hear what everyone else has to say, and excited to engage with you soon in the Q&A. So let's get rolling. First, a little background on EcoCycle. So we are based in Boulder, Colorado. We are one of the oldest and largest nonprofit recycling organizations. So we started one of the first 20 curbside recycling programs in the US. That was back in 1976. So fair to say, we've actually been in the business of recycling for 45 years now. We were there at the beginning. We are very proud to still be there today. And our roots are really in the hands-on every day of trying to make recycling work, trying to move our community towards zero waste. So with everything I share with you today, I like to think there is a team of people. I've got 65 folks behind me who are in the business every day of making recycling and composting work. That means we are running trucks, we're picking up recycling, composting, hard to recycle materials like electronics. We run major sorting facilities like a material recovery facility where we're sorting cardboard, plastics, and selling them to the market. We have an innovative center for hard to recycle materials where we're trying to find new uses to recycle materials like electronics, mattresses, even yoga mats, because we're in Boulder. We also, of course, have a ton of education and advocacy programs. We are out teaching every kid in Boulder County how to recycle and compost. We work with adults. We are down at the state legislature talking about new recycling policy, working with local communities, and also a thought leader on the national level. So thrilled to be here with you. And of course, like I said, representing an incredible diversity and long history of experience in recycling. So we're going to start with what is going on with recycling, what wild roller coaster we have been on in the past few years. I'm sure you've seen the headlines wondering what is recycling dead? What is going on? It's been a topsy-turvy few years. So let's talk about what's going on, why that's happened, and what that means for moving forward. So I want to start first at the 30,000 view level and talk about the why. Why is it that we recycle? Why is it important? Why is it that we're going to keep recycling and composting? So spoiler alert, recycling is not dead. It's about to make a pretty big comeback. And the reason is that it's a fantastic opportunity. Both economic, environmental, and social benefits come from recycling. So last year, 2020, we saw the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. It was kind of overshadowed by a pandemic, but still a lot of good reason to celebrate. In the past 50 years, we've recycled and composted over 2 billion tons of materials. That's had huge environmental benefits in terms of energy savings, clean air and clean water, reducing pollution, slowing habitat destruction, but also a massive climate benefit. It's had the equivalent climate benefit of taking 1 billion cars off the road every year. Think about what else it would take to take 1 billion cars off the road. And then think about how easy recycling is compared to that. So we often overlook it as a climate solution, but it really does have a huge carbon emissions reduction potential. And of course, recycling is also good for our economy. Recycling and composting create between 9 and 30 times more jobs per ton than landfilling. So this is about bolstering local economies, keeping materials in use, building toward that circular economy. So it has been a wild ride, as I said. And what you've heard in the news, I'm sure you've heard this narrative over the past few years, is it's about China. China stopped accepting US paper and plastics for recycling a few years ago. And since then, the recycling markets have been somewhat in turmoil, fair to say. And so what happened is we saw 25-year lows in pricing on materials across the board as a result of China closing off their market. There was a glut of materials that we were trying to recycle through too few outlets, and that is basic economics for a big price crash. So for an example, mixed paper, which is kind of like your office junk mail kind of stuff mixed in with magazines. We used to be able to sell that for $105 a ton. There were times in the last few years you lost money trying to sell it. You actually paid somebody to take it. So that just gives you a sense of the magnitude of the shift that we saw in costs. And then there were also some plastics that no longer had buyers. So it really was a tipping point in recycling. But I want to really underscore that China really wasn't the whole story. China even really wasn't most of the story. China was simply the straw that broke the camel's back. And in fact, there was a perfect storm of problems brewing in recycling for the past few decades. And China really helped bring that all to a head. We've seen recycling rates have been flatlined for the better part of 20 years. We're struggling with more plastics, less paper, which makes it more costly and difficult to sort. We were not investing in US manufacturing to make new paper, to make new plastics, which means we were over-relying on those Chinese markets. There was a ton of contamination growing in recycling carts when we switched to single stream. Coupled with all of that, we've got really low oil prices and virgin subsidies, which means virgin materials are just cheaper than recycled materials in some cases. So recycling is both trying to compete against low virgin prices and then also against low landfill prices. It's been a collision of all of these factors and several more that have brought recycling to a tipping point. So having been through a few wild years, we thought, let's hope we've hit the bottom and we're headed back up. And then of course, COVID happened. So like many of you, it's been another wild ride. And the COVID impacts of recycling have been somewhat mixed. There's actually been one really important benefit, and that happened very early on in the pandemic. And that was that recycling was recognized at the state level and national level as an essential service. And this was a pivotal shift in how we see recycling, because 20, 30 years ago, recycling was this niche environmental thing that people did. And now recycling has been declared essential to the economy, because it turns out you can't make toilet paper without recycling those old newspapers and those old magazines into the toilet paper. You can't make glass vials for vaccines without recycling your old beer bottles and your other glass containers. So recycling actually fuels manufacturing in the US. And there was a shortage of recyclables at the beginning of the pandemic that really pointed to the essential role of recycling in the supply chain. So that is super important to thinking about how we move toward a circular economy, which is really about using recycled materials over and over again. So that, of course, was the silver lining that has come out of COVID. We've also seen actually an overall decline in waste generation. I know we all feel like we're producing more plastics and more takeout, but overall waste is actually down, slightly, but down. So pros aside, there's of course been a lot of cons. You're hearing about cities cutting programs or temporarily suspending programs because they just don't have the staff. We're seeing much more waste on the residential side, which is actually harder to recycle than commercial waste in some ways. We're seeing PPP ending up as litter, and of course the health and safety concerns of the workers in the recycling industry. So if there was not enough going on, meanwhile, there is a global plastics crisis happening. And this has been one of the fastest moving environmental and social issues we have ever seen. It really has taken the world by storm. Governments, businesses, local communities, and everyone is trying to make traction to reduce plastic waste and also fuel production, which drives plastics. You all know the stats, so I'm not going to get into it, but I just wanted to sort of paint this picture that at the same time, the market collapse is happening because of China. You've got all these bubbling problems that have surfaced, that have plagued recycling for years. You've got this global plastics crisis. So you have this trifecta of massive things going on all at the same time, which leads us to a huge evolution in recycling. We are really on the verge of huge transformations in recycling. And what we see right off the bat is these amazing commitments from consumer goods companies, from major brands. I know many of you in the room have made these types of commitments. Thank you. Companies are saying we want 100% reusable, recyclable, or compostable plastics by 2025. This is huge. We've never seen this level of commitment, and this is truly a response to the pressure companies are feeling to eliminate plastics or find better solutions. And really a bright spot, I think, coming through COVID is these commitments have remained strong, right? We are still in the room having this conversation right now, which is kudos to the vision that this is something that we need to solve together. But in that commitment to make everything recyclable, reusable, compostable, there is a big elephant in the room when we are having those conversations. And that elephant in the room is flexible film packaging. It is a great packaging product, right? For all the reasons that you know, it's low weight, it's got all sorts of great properties to protect the product, but it is not recyclable, it's not really compostable, and it is not reusable. So how do we move forward together to find solutions for the growing use of flexible films? So in 2018, EcoCycle teamed up with Only Natural Pet and Pet Sustainability Coalition, and we developed a report that had recommendations on what is the state of affairs on recovering flexible films and what are solutions moving forward. So check out the report at the website, We're going to do a little bit of a summary, but tons more information online. And again, kudos to Only Natural Pet and PSC for really spearheading this type of forward-thinking research. So in a nutshell, we, in the report, EcoCycle put forward a set of solutions or a set of recommendations, and we grouped them into 3 categories. We looked at preferred options, which were, thumbs up, these are good ways to go. Acceptable options, which were, these maybe work, they've got some potential pitfalls that we need to avoid or be careful of, but there's some potential there. And then options that are just stay away from these, use extreme caution, these ones are pretty problematic. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail here, you can find a lot more in the report, but in short, the preferred solutions really focused on innovations around reusable packaging, new packaging formats, and then the opportunity to recycle flexible films, the pouches, with other film plastics. So making them into products like recycled lumber, integrating with store take-back programs. So definitely that seems like at least in the short term, the most viable solution for pouch recycling. In the acceptable category, we talked about certified compostable. Compostable is, of course, a very hot topic. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but there's also a lot of drawbacks on that and a lot of big questions still remaining. TerraCycle is a take-back program. I know some of you participate in that. It's a good model. It's questions about scalability, transparency of markets. There's some challenges there. And then the use of bioplastics are not always environmentally preferable to petroleum plastics, and they have some trade-offs. And so something that we need to just be conscious of and approach with caution. And then in the not acceptable, really under any circumstances, plastics to fuel, and then oxo-degradable additives, which break down the pouches into small little bits of plastics, which actually just makes the whole problem worse. So again, that is a super nutshell of a very detailed report. So please check that out, and definitely happy to answer more questions about that. So I want to just kind of break down, what has changed in the past 3 years since we came out with that research, and what does solutions look like? Are we getting any clearer? What challenges are we still having? So we're going to start first with recycling. So there has been, so we talked about some of the existing challenges plaguing recycling, but let's talk specifically about flexibles. So in the past couple of years, there has been a very prominent pilot project to try to recycle flexible film pouches, chip bags, that sort of thing, through curbside recycling. It was called the MRF of the Future, MRFF. MRF is where all your recyclables go to be sorted and then sold. So the idea was, could we put pouches in with curbside recycling? Could we sort them out at the MRF? And then would somebody buy them and make a product? And what the project found was, yes, sort of, but not really, actually. In a very layman's nutshell right there. The biggest challenge coming out of the project was there really were very few to no end users of the material. So the project was able to demonstrate that sorting the pouches is possible. It needs some more technology, but it's close. The technology could be there. However, it is very expensive. So questions about scalability are huge. But technology aside, it's not about whether you can sort the materials. At the end of the day, to make something recyclable, there has to be someone who's going to buy it and turn it into a new product, a new pouch, a new plastic package, something. And the project found really nobody wants these materials for a number of reasons. They're contaminated, they're multi-material, you don't know what you're getting, every little bit is different. So it's still extremely challenging to find end users, or what we call markets, for these materials. And until that changes, recycling is going to be a very limited solution for flexibles. You're, of course, also competing with really low oil prices for plastics. So anything that costs a lot more money is just not going to be viable in terms of recycling. And we're still struggling with what kind of, if we're not going to do curbside collection, there's been a lot of interest in store take-back programs where you can drop your flexible films with your plastic bags. We haven't nailed that model yet. Consumer participation is really lacking. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in solutions. So one of the big things that's really been talked about in the last few years is advanced recycling technologies, or chemical recycling, this has also been called. And it's the idea that we can use some pretty high-tech technologies to break those plastics down into their original components and really improve some of the challenges we have with traditional recycling. And we really dislike the term advanced recycling or chemical recycling because it's really a class of technologies. It's several components, and it's not fair to talk about them all under one umbrella. One of the big reasons for that is because the most dominant form of chemical recycling is plastics to fuel, in which the plastic is converted to a diesel or some sort of fuel equivalent, which is then burned. EcoCycle's opinion is that plastics to fuel is not recycling. That carbon is used once, it is burned, it is not a circular economy where the materials are being used over and over again. And we're looking at a future where we need to rapidly decarbonize. So burning plastics, burning fossil fuels is not the future. So we don't think this is a good solution at any point. We are also supported the European Union has declared plastics to fuel as not recycling, as has the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So there's a lot of global leaders saying plastics to fuel is not recycling. That being said, there are a few advanced recycling technologies that do take plastics and convert them back into new plastics. They're called purification, they're called depolymerization. Tons of stuff there. We could, again, spend like the entire time talking about this. But I just wanted to leave you with a couple thoughts. One, these projects don't really exist right now. They are pretty much pilots. Some of them are lab scale even. They are 10 to 15 years to scale at best. And there are huge questions around how are we collecting these plastics? How are the economics going to work? What are the environmental and social impacts? So this has really been sold as this great solution to improve recycling, but it's something that we feel like has a lot of pitfalls. So to recap, plastics to fuel is not recycling, and there are huge unanswered questions about these other technologies. So while it may play some role, it also begs the question of what else could we be doing in 10 to 15 years with this kind of level of investment. So we'll explore some of those solutions. Lastly, there are also some challenges emerging with composting and bioplastics. So when composters accept compostable packaging, they get in a ton of contamination because people think other things are compostable, they're confused, it looks like. It's really hard on the composters, and you've seen major programs like the city of Portland, which has just stopped collecting compostable packaging. They're just done. They've gone back to food only. So this is a real threat to the future of bioplastics and the future of compostable packaging. The composters have a lot of legitimate concerns and really need a concerted effort to help them through this. Of course, you know, there's a massive lack of infrastructure for compost collection. I think it's less than 5% of US households have access to food waste recycling. So we are in the very early days of composting infrastructure, and it's something where the packaging and the infrastructure are going to need to evolve together. And lastly, there's some legit environmental questions about whether and when bioplastics or compostables are a better product. They actually can have a lot more water pollution, a lot of other impacts from their production that don't always make them a better product. And I'd highly encourage you to check out the great work done by Oregon Department of Environmental Quality around some of the issues on compostable plastics. There's been a growing consensus that compostable is definitely not the solution for all packaging, and that maybe we can start to circle to sort of narrow in on when is compostable the right choice. So definitely if it brings food scraps to the composter, thumbs up. You can see there's some cases in this yellow area where maybe it makes sense, but we're not quite sure yet. And that's where pet food, other food contact packaging falls in. So this is, again, we're in this yellow area. We're not sure exactly where we're going. So it's definitely something that's going to need some work. But I highly recommend staying out of the red zone. So if you've got products that fall into that red category, that's really not going to be the best option for compostables. It's really not what composters want. It may not be the best environmental benefits. So it's not just, hey, thumbs up bioplastics all the time. There really is some nuance in there. Of course, something that we've also seen get great traction over the last few years is reuse. And this has really accelerated with e-commerce. We're like totally rethinking how we use and package material. So you've got major platforms like Loop delivering products in reusable stainless steel and other containers. You've got reusable shipping totes. You've got McDonald's, Burger King, Tim Hortons investing in reusable packaging. I mean, this is as mainstream as it gets. So super cool opportunities emerging in all of this. And I highly recommend checking out the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They've got a great library of reuse ideas, reuse companies around the world, and it is phenomenal what is happening out there. It's a great place to get inspired. So with that, let's talk solutions. What can you do right now, right? We've talked about several things that are a little farther out, things that we need to work on together. What can you do right now on sustainable packaging? And the number one thing is add more recycled content across all of your packaging types. Adding more recycled content is the best proven strategy to reduce the environmental impact of that type of packaging. So if your packaging goes from 10 to 25% recycled content, you've reduced that environmental impact. You can calculate those greenhouse gas savings on that link. So strongly encourage you to commit to at least 30% post-consumer recycled content across all of your packaging by 2025. So not just plastics, right? What is the paper you're using in your labels, your shelf hangers, all those sorts of things in your boxes? Huge opportunities here and huge environmental impact. Something else you can do today, I've got 3 tips. Follow the design guidelines, right? Labels, adhesives, different types of plastics all make things more challenging. So check out the Association of Plastics Recyclers and design your products to be compatible with our current recycling system. We also need clear and consistent labeling. Consumers need to know, they're looking on your product, what to do with it. So definitely let them know, is it recyclable? Is it compostable? Is it not? It's important to tell them if it's not recyclable. And we also need to simplify. We need to move towards single resin formats for our flexible films. They'll be more recyclable. We need to drop anything that's in a 3, 6, or 7 plastics. These are not readily recyclable. They're not going to be readily recyclable, and we need to simplify in order to help strengthen recycling. We also need your help to pilot new collection models. So PSC has been working on collecting flex films at stores. This is a great example. We have not figured out exactly how to collect all these plastics, right? So consumers are kind of lackadaisical about plastics recycling, and we need to figure out how to encourage them, how to incentivize them. So that is something as recyclers, we're looking to you. Brands are really good at consumer engagement. So how do we get consumers more engaged in participating in these programs? Whether it's through e-commerce, curbside recycling, store take-back, there's lots of room for innovation here. And then, of course, moving forward, there's going to be a huge investment in new policies around recycling. So defining what is compostable, setting standards across how materials are represented as compostable, having a standard list of what's recyclable around the country, having standardized labeling. These are all going to be huge for increasing consumer awareness, cleaning up recycling and composting. So we would love your support as companies to say, yes, I support this type of policy. I'm willing to adhere to these guidelines. This is going to go a long way. And then the other big one is financial responsibility. So let's talk about that for a second. There's a really big shift happening right now in recycling, and that is looking at who pays for recycling. And what we are seeing is numerous states, national legislation, looking at this fundamental shift and saying it's not cities and taxpayers who should pay for recycling. Recycling has to be embedded into the cost of the product. So the goal is to create a financially sustainable, harmonized recycling system. And we're seeing growing support from consumer goods companies around this. We're seeing statements from the Flexible Packaging Association, Consumer Brands Association, that this kind of shift is going to be needed in order to make recycling a real solution and a financially sustainable solution moving forward. So, known as extended producer responsibility, what does this type of policy actually mean for you as a brand? So the goal is to have the cost of recycling embedded into the price of the product. We do that by charging a fee per ton on the type of packaging. So if you use an aluminum can, maybe you're charged 1/10 of a cent. If you use a plastic bottle, maybe you're charged 0.3%. The idea is that you're charged less money for more recyclable materials. And because it's based on the weight of the packaging, you can save money by using. So the classic example we always give is the toothpaste tube in the toothpaste box. In Europe, where you see these types of EPR programs, the manufacturers have eliminated the box because they don't want to be paying for that extra packaging. They're just paying for the packaging, the recycling of the tube. So EPR is a massive shift that's coming. It's fundamentally going to transform how we pay for recycling, and it's going to put financial responsibility back on companies. It's going to be managed. Companies are going to have a say in how the whole thing is run. This really is a huge shift moving forward. So I encourage you to stay engaged with this, to lend your support to it. Other solutions I just want to wrap up and cover. Reimagine. So in the next 2 to 3 years, I know this is not something you're going to do tomorrow, but we're really in a position where we're going to innovate and reimagine what packaging is like. E-commerce is radically changing our lives. We need to rethink, do we even need packaging when it's already coming in a box and it's coming to the door? How do we look at these delivery models? How do we pilot, partner, innovate these types of solutions? So Ellen MacArthur Foundation, again, has some awesome resources. They're really looking at 4 different types of reuse programs. Is it refilled at home? Is it returned from your doorstep? Do you return it to the store? Do you refill it on the go? Tons of really cool stuff happening here. And this is the future. This is the most important thing we can be doing in the next couple of years, is how do we just totally transform our idea of packaging? And then lastly, we need to continue to work together, right? So again, I am thrilled to be here having this conversation with you. And full disclosure, I don't have the answers. Recyclers don't have the answers. Composters don't have the answers. We're all working together to create really large system change. And it's exciting that we are all in the room together, because as recyclers, as brands, we've not always worked together. We've been in silos. So finally, we are coming together to look at real solutions, and we are going to evolve toward a great circular economy moving forward. It's going to be hard, but we're going to work for it together. So in summary, recycling is rapidly changing. Big changes coming forward. It's really going to transform in the coming years. We're going to see a huge shift around extended producer responsibilities and putting the cost of the recycling into the cost of the product. Flexible films still remain the most challenging material to deal with, so we're going to have to work on that together and keep exploring solutions. The best thing you can do right now, add more recycled content. The next thing you can do, rethink packaging. Let's get creative. And of course, we're all in this together. Thank you for being here. Thrilled to have the opportunity to share my thoughts. Look forward to a robust Q&A, and thanks for all the work that you do. Bye, all.
So next, I'm so excited to be joined by someone that I think has a very unique but very important voice in the recycling and packaging in the pet industry conversation. I'm thrilled to introduce you to Kurt from Engineered Plastics, who served as our recycler and will continue to serve as our recycler through the Flex Forward program. And he's going to be talking to us about what is, the other end of this supply chain and what does this actually look like from a recycling point of view. So good afternoon, Kurt. Thanks for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself to our crowd?
Sure, Melissa. Kurt Dustin with Engineered Plastics, plastic recycler out of Erie, Pennsylvania. 40 plus years in plastics. And for me as a plastic recycler, it's really exciting when a group comes to us and starts looking at opportunities and how we actually do this right. And for us, if we can help guide it, it just makes us part of the process.
Thanks for that introduction, Kurt. So a couple weeks ago, for those of you who don't know, myself and a colleague at Earth Animal had the privilege to come visit Kurt in Pennsylvania for the recycling trials of our Flex Forward program. Now, we're going to be talking more about this program a little bit later this afternoon as part of our sustainable packaging soiree. But I can say that it was nothing if not a substantial education for myself, at least, as to kind of seeing this side of the packaging supply chain. But we had some challenges and difficulties based on the bags that came in, didn't we, Kurt?
Yeah, you can say that. Yeah, I think you received that call from me at about 5 o'clock your time in the morning when I started sorting. So we received 2 bales, and I started taking these apart. The product was collected in the stores by the consumer, and whenever that's collected by the consumer, you never know what you're going to get. And I think this was a good cross-section of what the opportunities and issues are. The one thing is, I can tell you that pet owners seem to be very conscious of being sustainable because there's almost zero dog or animal feed in these bags. So that was the high point of it. The issue was I didn't realize how many different types of packaging there are out there for pets.
Yeah, I took a list. And just based on pictures, I think we got at least 300 or 400 different kinds of bags, Kurt. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, that sounds about right. After about 20 hours of sorting out 1,600 pounds, I tried to sort it so we can make the best stream to make it recyclable.
So, Kurt, I think people don't really kind of understand recycling and the process works. Can you kind of explain it to us really quick?
What we're doing is we're feeding product, whether we're tipping it onto a conveyor belt or hand feeding it, we feed it on a conveyor belt at 1,000 pounds an hour. So we really don't have the time to sort and segregate it. It goes through a metal detector. The metal detector makes sure we don't get bolts, nuts, screws, anything going through it could damage our equipment. And the one problem is your metallized films will set off my metal detector. At that point, it goes into a cutting chamber where it shreds it, cuts it up. It goes into an extruder, which is a screw that's spinning. It forces the plastic through. We bring it up to about 450 degrees. We run it through a filtration system, then a degassing system, because all the ink that you guys put on for all your artwork has to come off. And then it goes into a pelletizer. Now, the pelletizer is much like your Play-Doh when you were a kid and you made spaghetti out of it. It's the same thing. So we're pushing out spaghetti, we're cutting it, it goes into a water bath, cools, and then we dry it. So at the end, we come out with this beautiful plastic. Again, we're making about 1,000 pounds an hour.
Well, thank you for that description, Kurt. I've also got, just for all of our more visual people, a video of this whole process. So check it out.
That's much more than usual because we have like
there things that pet food manufacturers or brands are putting into their bags that, pose a significant problem when it comes to recycling of the bags?
When we ran this, I think we knew some of the issues. Everything that isn't low density polyethylene, isn't that plastic, is a contaminant for us. So our big concern that I could see was a lot of it was metallized. And as soon as you add that metallizing to it, it degrades the properties where that material is no longer where I can recycle it. It has no value. One of the biggest issues, for our concern for the bag is paper. So if I have a paper dog food bag, and you can tell it's paper because if it's terrible, it's terrible for us. So that was probably the second biggest issue that we need to eliminate. And the other one is we just don't know what's in there. Do we have PET? Do we have EVOH? And what are the percentages? So our trial was really to say what's hindering recycling and how do we correct this?
So it sounds like we really had to identify on kind of what are the three most problematic problems in packaging. It sounds like it's going to be bags with some kind of metallized layer or metallized, marketing on the outside, bags with either paper labels or a paper label, or just bags in general that whether that's the zippers or the enclosures or whatever, we can't tell what it's made out of. Does that sound right?
Yeah. If we're working with a base of low density polyethylene, anything that isn't low density polyethylene is a contaminant. So if the closure is a nylon, I think most of the companies are getting away from it. I'm seeing some great designs out there, but not everyone's doing it. And we need to be a clearinghouse of best techniques to have a standardized system. So the bag, whoever's recycling this across the country, they know that if it's a pet food bag, it's a low density polyethylene bag that I can recycle and the recycler can make money on.
Perfect. All right, Kurt. So I think that's really helpful. And honestly, that's information that before our recycling trials a couple of weeks ago, I didn't even know. And so I think there's a lot of people out there that also don't know that as well. Flipping that, so we're moving away from the metallized, the paper, and the, a bit only in different kinds of bags. If you could wave a magic wand, give some advice to us, pet food professionals making bags about decisions. How would you design the perfect bag?
We have to design the recycling around existing technology and existing collection. For us, a low density polyethylene bag, a mono material works great for us, and it can be recycled at thousands of facilities around the country. So to make it really simple, we're going to focus on one mono material. It's going to be low density polyethylene, which happens to be the cheapest plastic out there right now, which helps you on cost. We're going to standardize. Everyone's going to do it the same way. We're going to eliminate the things that cause problems that we talked about, the metallized films, the multi-layers, closures.
Yeah, I love that, Kurt. The example that you gave me was soda bottles or water bottles, right?
If every brand made their own type of water bottle, we would have zero recycling in this country. So we really have to standardize. And it can't be just a few. It has to be the whole industry, because if not, it's going to pollute the stream. We're running 1,000 pounds an hour on our equipment, and it's not the largest machine out there. So we don't have time to sort and segregate this. So it really has to come into us clean and standardized. So I know that if I see pet food packaging there, I know what it is. I know I can recycle it, and I know I have demand for it after it's produced.
All right, Kurt. So now we know what not to do with bags, and we know what to do with bags. I'd like to close with one kind of more open-ended question. What do you think, in your opinion, is the one kind of misconception about the recycling industry or recyclers that's really impacting kind of the industry as a whole?
If we're looking specifically at the bags, we have to understand that pet food packaging is not going to go in your standard curbside container. That's not going to be going through the MRF. So we have to understand, how it's collected. And a big part of that, is driving it is how it's collected is if it's not profitable, it's not sustainable. So we have to look at the whole program. Is the end value of the material. Once we recycle it, we make that plastic pellet, that 300 million pounds a year. Can we sell it? Does it have value? Why recycle something that has no value? So that's really where we have to come in designing. So recyclers need to make profit. We have to collect this. It has to be self-sustaining.
Yeah, Kurt, I think you bring up a really good point in that, something that I've been saying for months is that recyclers aren't recyclers out of the goodness of their heart, right? They're a business and you need to be able to stay in business or there's no market for recyclable at all. So thank you so much for chatting. I'm really excited to hear the audience's thoughts and what questions they have. Your insight is so valuable, but it's such an opportunity, right? Of that, if we all work together and we figure out a way to tackle these problems, we can take 300 million pounds of plastic out of the landfill just in the US alone. So thank you again so much, Kurt.
You're very welcome. Love to see the difference we're going to have in 2 or 3 years when this comes to fruition.
Hi, everyone. Kurt and Kate, thank you so much for your contributions to today. I know there's been so many headlines about what's going on with our recycling system, and people are starting to feel like, wow, is the recycling system going to make it through? So, Kate, really appreciate you giving us this boost of confidence. Go ahead, there is a poll in there, so if you want to let us know how you're feeling about the future of recycling, you go ahead and answer that question, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. And Kurt, thanks so much for your perspectives on, what are those quick changes we can make, talking about that metallized barrier, moving toward a mono material. And we do have a lot of questions coming in from the attendees today. So I'm going to get started on those and pass them over to you. So Kate, had a question. You listed the kind of 3 criteria, or sorry, the 3 sections when we evaluated together about a dozen different alternatives or solutions with the multi-laminate flex material. So you talked about the good, the proceed with caution, and then the avoid. And I wanted to go over the inclusion of oxodegradables in your avoid section. Is there any exception to that rule?
Oxodegradables are something I really urge you to stay away from. They simply break the plastic apart into really small pieces, and it's a lot harder to clean up really small pieces of plastic than it is larger pieces of plastics. So, everyone sort of paints this picture of maybe if it's in a developing country where there's no waste management system and we know it's going to end up in the ocean, that maybe oxodegradable is the right solution, but that's not the market, I think, for most of the folks in the room. I think it's really a dangerous distraction from some better design changes. So I think folks are better served to stay away from it.
Thanks so much, Kate. Kurt, have you come into contact with oxodegradables at your facility?
I haven't, but the problem is when we're recycling, we can't tell what we get. So all we would do is we would send this to our customer for the material and maybe a downgraded material. So that's our biggest concern.
So another question for you, Kurt. Can you describe, the difference between your success when you have a mono material versus what we have today in the marketplace? 99% are this, 3 to 5 layer sandwich material that we just ran a bunch of trials on. When it comes out the other side, and ultimately you're trying to sell this back into a market to create financial sustainability for the whole recycling process, what is the difference in pricing that you're able to sell that back to the market look like for you?
Well, I would have to say the material's about worthless. My customers want a consistent stream. They want to know what they're getting. Just like you, when you have your bags manufactured, you want to know you have a consistent process. With the broad spectrum of packaging that I get in, first of all, it's miserable to recycle because plastics are melting at different temperatures. But even if I can recycle it, there's no end value in this. It could be the absolute lowest grade. Maybe we can blend it in, but that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We need to develop this. Monolayer material will allow us to recycle this, and there's plenty of demand for that material right now, and the price justifies the recycling.
Thanks, Kurt. Kate, a question for you. So we're talking about, a long-term shift toward a more mono material, and that will really create some financial sustainability for the recycling market. Short term, you also called out a need for take-back programs, and I'm sitting behind a Flex Forward bin here, which is the Pet Sustainability Coalition, along with Earth Animal and pet food experts, our trial on a take-back program for pet food bags today. Can you talk about why modeling take-back programs is important?
Absolutely, and kudos to PSC for trying to make that work. I think when we think about recycling, we so often think about curbside recycling, but as Kurt pointed out earlier, these flexible film bags are not making it into curbside recycling anytime soon. The MRFs and the processing is just not set up to handle them. So meanwhile, we need to innovate on what does it look to collect materials from households, from consumers, if it's not curbside? Is it store take back? What are the opportunities with e-commerce, which has radically shifted how we're delivering and potentially taking back products? So there's a whole class of what we would consider harder to recycle materials, including many types of packaging, that we really need to figure out what is the right collection infrastructure and how do you motivate consumers to actually do it? It's one thing to set it up, but actually how to engage them in doing it and doing it correctly. And that's definitely a frontier that we are just at the beginning of.
Thanks for that, Kate. So I had a question coming in from attendees around what happens to these, even if it's a mono material, also known as a recycle-ready resin. So, we know the pet food bags of today are mostly heading to landfill, and really appreciate Kurt's efforts to figure out what alternative options are for that. But I'm wondering if either of you know, when you take a bag back to a store drop-off, and that is the mono resin, where are those materials going?
Kate, you want this one?
Sure. I will say that we operate a film take-back program at our facility in Boulder, and we work with Trex. So they make composite lumber. So they blend the used plastics with a little bit of sawdust, and they make that composite decking, lumber type things that you've seen in a lot of applications. There's also a lot of research and some emerging opportunity to make these types of films into other types of building materials, potentially concrete block, potentially wallboard. So that type of building material system is kind of where things are going for now. It's not really back to packaging, which is what we'd ultimately like to see. So definitely lots of room for improvement on the end uses.
What we see, we work with companies that collect it. So they're already collecting low-density polyethylene bags at many retailers, at the Walmarts of the world. So there's already that stream being collected. And if this bag is designed correctly, it can go into an existing stream. So I think that's what we really need to focus on, and saying what's being collected now and how can we add to it, because more of the same is good. It improves the logistics, allows us to collect it, and gives us a larger, robust feedstock.
All right, so final question today before we head to our next session. If everyone joining the conference today, we've got 400 people, and these people make decisions inside companies, and their impact can be enormous. So if each one of them could take one single action today, what would it be?
I would say design for the existing recycling stream. You have to design for recycling and be realistic. And just because you put a number on it doesn't mean it's going to be recycled. So, we have to make sure that we're creating a pellet that has demand and that there's consistency in the market.
So Kurt hit on the design side, so I'm going to hit on the demand side. So recycling isn't just I make something and somebody else is going to recycle it. It is how are you contributing to the circular economy? What starts with what are you buying, and are you buying recycled material? How much recycled content can you add to your plastics, your paper? Look across your product spectrum and look at the opportunities to add more recycled content. That is the greatest barrier to recycling today, is that lack of end markets.
All right. Well, thanks again, Kate and Kurt, for joining us for our Ask a Recycler Any Question. Appreciate all of our attendees entering questions as well. We're going to go over the solutions we've recommended and where the pet industry is today on some of these solutions, like maximizing recycled content, moving toward monomaterial, as well as standardized labeling in our next session. So thanks again for all of your time today, and back to you, Melissa.